welcome to the channel. My name is Maddie, and for those of you who don't know me, I am an attorney, a former college athlete, and while I was in school, I was also chair of the Division I Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Now, a lot has happened in the world of college sports since our last episode, and I think the best place to start is with the new law in California known as the Fair Pay to Play Act. And what this law in effect does is prohibit schools in the state of California from preventing college athletes from profiting off of their names, images, and likenesses. And it also allows athletes to hire out agents if they want to find contracts, and really gives athletes the same rights to their names, images, and likenesses as every other student at their school, as every administrator, coach, NCAA staff member, and citizen of this country. Because the only citizen in this country currently who does not have a right to be compensated for the use of their name, image, and likeness is college athletes. And that is strictly because of the rules within the NCAA that they have for years touted as being so crucial to the educational experience of athletes and this notion of amateurism. So if an athlete were to receive compensation for the use of their name, image, and likeness, they can lose their eligibility. And the state of California decided, you know what, that's just not fair. So unanimously, this law was passed and the governor signed the bill into law. But while that was happening, the NCAA decided to weigh in. Now, I'm actually going to read a letter that was written by the NCAA Board of Governors in response to this law when it was still a bill being passed by the California State Assembly by a 73-0 margin. And after this happened, they were very worried that it might become a law, which it did. So they wrote the following letter, which is also up on their website. And I'm going to just address some of the glaring statements that happen in it, because I think it is critically important in this country, especially with all of the momentum towards change, to really help the public and those who can make a difference to understand really what goes on in the world of athletics, which is that there is rampant abuse that happens. Athletes are not protected. They don't have access to people who can really help them, and schools are really insulated by the schools themselves and by the NCAA, so they're not really held accountable for some of the really terrible things that happen within the world of athletics. And so to kind of address that, I'm actually going to go through this letter and talk about some of those things. Letter begins, Governor Newsom, the 1,100 schools that make up the NCAA have always, in everything we do, supported a level playing field for all student athletes. This core belief extends to each member college and university in every state across the nation. That's really not true. Starting in 2014, in response to some of the conferences talking about forming their own football conference and as a result really taking away a lot of money from the NCAA decided to give weighted voting to the Power 5 conferences, which by default means that they just have a lot more power in the voting and really can control all the rules within the structure. California's Senate Bill 206 would upend that balance. If the bill becomes law and California's 58 NCAA schools are compelled to allow an unrestricted name, image, and likeness scheme, in other words, if every school in the state of California was required to treat the athletes exactly the same as every other student there by allowing them to profit off of their name, image, and likeness, it would erase the critical distinction between college and professional athletics, and, because it gives those schools an unfair recruiting advantage, would result in them eventually being unable to compete in NCAA competitions. These outcomes are untenable and would negatively impact more than 24,000 college student athletes, California student athletes, across 3 divisions. Well, see, right there, it sounds like if the NCAA just allows them to compete, it actually wouldn't affect the 24,000 California student athletes. Right now, nearly 500,000 student athletes in all 50 states compete under the same rules. That's actually not true. Every conference within the NCAA has their own rules, in addition to the NCAA rules. And one glaring example is the Ivy League Conference, which specifically prohibits off-season competition. So that means that the athletes are really students when they're not in season, unless they play another sport, which they are allowed to do, but there is no mandated practice and coaches are not allowed to require them to do anything in the off-season. Other conferences, not the case. This bill would remove that essential element of fairness and equal treatment that forms the bedrock of college sports. The NCAA continues to focus on the best interests of all student athletes nationwide. If that were true, there would be protections in place for athletes. There would be a reporting structure for abusive treatment by coaches, for just even inappropriate behavior. There would be individuals that athletes can trust that are not obligated to really be loyal to the university, that would be able to help advise them on things ranging from whether they should transfer to whether what is going on in their team is really unacceptable and rises to the level of someone needs to step in and address it. But none of those are in place, nor is there a system in place that allows athletes who have been injured during their time in college or sustain injuries as a result of their playing time to access health insurance that will actually address those injuries once they've graduated. Nor has there been a real effort in concussions until really 2013, and that, if you can call that an effort, the NCAA hired its first chief medical officer in 2013. The NCAA was created because of the large number of deaths that were occurring in football. And so if they really prioritized the health and safety of college athletes, there would have been medical officials employed by the NCAA at its inception, and certainly years and years ago when these issues of concussions and other major issues and injuries that are well known to be a problem in the world of sports in general started becoming such a hot topic in public discussion. NCAA member schools already are working on changing rules for all student athletes to appropriately use their name, image, and likeness in accordance with our values, but not pay them to play. So the NCAA is saying that not only are they the best individuals to decide what is in the best interest of student athletes, which it seems they've proven they're not, since nobody is representing the interests of athletes when these rules are being created, nor are they meaningfully included in the discussions in the first place, nor do they have enough voting power to really make a difference within the structure, which is another thing I'll address. Athletes didn't have any voting power until 2014. And the only reason that they did is because SAC stood up in the middle of convention in 2014 and said, hey, you left us off the structure, we should have a vote. And there was so much media attention at that convention that the NCAA had to respond. And the way that they did was to give athletes so little power in voting that they can't do anything. Because again, Power 5 has weighted votes. That means that they far outnumber the one student who's on any number of the committees as far as voting. The NCAA has consistently stood by its belief that student athletes are students first, and they should not be employees of the university. Okay, so in order to be a student first, meaning that you prioritize your education, you can't be employed by the university. So by default, that means that every student who is employed by the university and receiving extra benefits is actually not prioritizing their education, and that the university is doing them a disservice as well. And let's talk about the NCAA make sure that it's students first. If that were true, there would be no travel during the week because athletes miss class. So there'd be no classes missed because of competition. We wouldn't create schedules around TV contracts and advertisers. March Madness couldn't possibly exist because you take athletes out of class for weeks on end, and they don't have time during the day, realistically, to be doing any schoolwork at all. And athletes wouldn't be forced into majors, and they wouldn't have to make a decision between taking a class and going to practice, which isn't an option. They just aren't allowed to take classes that conflict with practice times, nor are they allowed to attend office hours that conflict with practice times, nor are they allowed to miss a game particularly. And on top of that, if we want to talk about health and safety, there would be a lot more priority put on sleep and injury prevention, which means not running athletes ragged, not controlling every second of their day so that they can actually rest and recuperate. Sleep, very much associated with brain function. If you don't have it, if you are traveling till 2 a.m. and then have to get up for an 8 a.m. class, you're probably not functioning at your highest level to really absorb what your professor is saying. And oh, by the way, when they run from practice to class and there's zero time to get food, very difficult to concentrate on an empty stomach. And those are just a few examples of the very, very many. And on top of that, every time that the media has really put a lot of pressure on the NCAA, they always come out, and even things that they have stuck to, that we will never do this. This would be against every tenet of what we believe in our fundamentals. The NCAA has looked at their rules and said, okay, we're addressing them. And then they usually come out with some half measure that maybe addresses it, maybe doesn't, but definitely usually isn't in the best interest of athletes. Because many of the issues we're still talking about were talked about in 2012, 13, 14, and before that. And they're still being discussed because there has been no meaningful pressure put on the NCAA by means of actual legislation to change any of that. It isn't possible to resolve the challenges of today's sports environment in this way, by one state taking unilateral action. Well, there we can agree. The other 49 states need to implement the same laws, and they need to go way further than this one does, because I think this is a step in the right direction. But there are way more protections needed for athletes. They need independent representation. They need people really looking out for them. And we need to get serious about what's going on in sports and what's really healthy for these athletes who are graduating with injuries, mental health issues, debilitating lifelong problems that they're going to deal with as a result of their days in college. With more than 1,100 schools and nearly 500,000 student athletes across the nation, again, I'd like to highlight that number. So approximately 500,000 people every year are being affected by bad rules within the NCAA. It's time for change. The rules and policies of college sports must be established through the association's collaborative governance system, which again does not involve meaningful input from athletes. And we can talk about that in another episode, because certainly I was in enough rooms to realize that the opinions of athletes did not matter. And they were not taken seriously. And not only that, but athletes in college don't even really know what they're entitled to ask for. And a lot of that is the mindset of a college athlete. It's team first, it's not complaining, it's fake it till you make it, it's get through, it's push through, and you're hard workers anyway, so you're not complaining. But it's also why they need protection. And to rely on the NCAA and its administrators and schools and conference officials to make rules that, again, are just going to help its bottom line. Because it is about the money. No matter what anyone comes out from the NCAA and says, if they were prioritizing education and athletes, we would actually see the changes and these young people would not be affected this way. A national model of collegiate sports requires mutually agreed upon rules. Okay, and those rules can comply with the law in states, which hopefully will actually look out for the best interests of athletes, because they'll be made by elected officials who are put in office to protect their citizens, whether that be in a state or in the nation. And so I think it's time, NCAA, to step aside and actually allow government to work to protect its citizens, because you certainly are not. We urge the state of California to reconsider this harmful and we believe unconstitutional bill and hope the state will be a constructive partner in our efforts to develop a fair name, image, and likeness approach for all 50 states. Sincerely, members of the NCAA Board of Governors. Well, I feel personally more comfortable with the Supreme Court deciding what is and is not constitutional rather than the NCAA, who misrepresents every case they've ever been involved in that has consistently held certain policies within the NCAA unconstitutional. And then the NCAA turns around and says, nope, SCOTUS told us we can do this. Meanwhile, that's not exactly what happened. So it's time for serious legislation that really protects athletes, and that time is now. And with the momentum going that direction, I urge everyone across the country to understand these issues and to push for far more. This is about way more than compensation. This is about lives. This is about lives being affected for a lifetime and people being unprotected while they're in school by a system that is designed to really abuse them. So I'll leave this here, and we'll have other episodes. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment below, and we'll see you back. All right, bye.
This video may constitute attorney advertising. The ideas expressed in this video by Maddie Salomone, as well as any posted comments, are opinions intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. Receipt of this information, or using the YouTube platform or other social media platforms to contact the Y channel, does not create an attorney-client relationship.